we talked about prophets, and we focused more on what are the things that we need to know when it comes to these particular tools that we're using in interpretation. So for this one, we will be now exercising, and we will now be using these different tools. And that's why for this part two, we will do the biblical exegesis application. And sayang, kakaunti sila ngayon, pero I'm sure mas may enjoy natin yung activity, because mas madaling mag-correct, no? And hopefully we will have a simpler approach, and what do you call that, more understandable approach to how we can use these tools in interpretation. Okay, but this time, last time, I only focused on literary criticism. I talked about a little on historical criticism, but um, more on the general point of view of as to why historical criticism is important in biblical interpretation, especially in the Old Testament texts. No, and so what we will do this evening, I will be including historical criticism, because just like what I've said last time, when we do the actual exegesis, of course we will do the historical criticism, we will do the application, or we call it the theological criticism, and that's why I included them here, this one and this one. If you are following my mouse, no, kung kita nyo ba yung mouse ko,
Yes
guys?
po.
Yan. So we have this two that I have added, but I will remove this exposition of the prophets, because in during the first part, what I really wanted to do is for us to see what are some of the issues that surrounds the interpretation of the prophets, and I want to expose that to all of you. And that's basically my only reason why I had to talk about exposition of the prophets, bringing in and talking more about what are some issues that the scholars are dealing with, what are some critical issues that we need to take note of, that we need to address. And because this is more on practice, more on using the tools that we've talked about, I will be removing this one, the exposition of the prophets. So that's it. Okay. Now we will be there was a comment that was presented to me by Obed, about why not talk about Ezekiel. Now we will be talking about Ezekiel, but not the passage that that person wanted. The passage that I chose is one of the passages that are hard to understand, and one of the passages that has a lot of controversies, and that's why I said I think this is the best passage for the team. Now, although this could be too advanced, but I think ano I think we will be able to still simplify it. Okay, so we will read the text, and can I ask Vivi girl, are you there?
Parang ano yun
Pwede
siya,
mo
pas?
bang
Ah, may parang
dami?
na-
Dami account?
hindi, parang may ginagawa siya. Ako na lang po siguro.
Okay, okay. Sige, go ahead.
Okay. So, uh, Ezekiel, no? What chapter is this, Pas?
Sorry, hindi ko pala nalagay. Ezekiel 28.
28. Okay. 11 to
Uh,
14.
yeah.
So Ezekiel 28, 11 to 14. Moreover, the word of the Lord came to me. Mortal, raise a lamentation over the king of Tyre and say to him, Thus says the Lord God, you were the signet of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering, carnelian, chrysolite, and moonstone, beryl onyx, and jasper, sapphire, turquoise, and emerald, and worked in gold were your settings and your settings and your engravings. On the day that you were created, they were prepared. With an anointed cherub as guardian I placed you. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked among the stones of fire.
Okay. Thank you, Obed. So notice if you will look at this, let's call it oracle, another term for prophecy. No, it's an English term. It's just that it was branded by by some quote unquote traditional Christians, and they thought that the word oracle is only exclusive to the pagan, pagan worshippers, to the witch or sorcerers, but not really. It's a generic term, the term oracle, and we used that last time. So I just like to emphasize that. Now let's just call it this oracle or this prophecy. Okay. So because most scholars would use oracle for this one. Okay, so notice the underlined words here. Now, these are the things that I think we need to take note of. We need to understand. And so we have here, word of the Lord came to me. Now, again, like what we've discussed, how did this happen? We really do not know. Did he take note of the words that came from the mouth of God verbatim, or uh, he was able to see a vision? Then he saw the main point of the vision, and so later on he interpreted that, and that's the one that he communicated now to the people. So another important uh, praise here is the king of Tyre. No? Who is this king of Tyre? Uh, and this is the message of the Lord. To him, you were the signet of perfection. So the king of Tyre is the signet of perfection. He is full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. Sounds like, later on, we will try to see whether this is referring to Adam or to Satan, no? Because if you will look at the text, it seems like it's it's also talking about Satan, no? And verse 13, you were in Eden, the garden of God. So this one seems like it's talking to Adam. And then every precious stone was your covering. Yeah, so he described it. Ano ba yung meron doon sa place na yon. And on that day you were created, they were prepared. And then with an anointed cherubim as guardian placed you. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walk among the stones of fire. When we look at this one, seems like this is referring to the Mount of Zion, where the presence of God is. But then again, we really do not know. And these are some of the issues that we need to resolve for this particular prophecy or oracle. Okay, now we'll move on to verse 15. Okay, until 19. Can someone read this? Any volunteers from the group?
Go ahead,
Me?
Jean.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, thank
You
you.
were you were blameless in your ways from the day that you were created until iniquity was found in you. In the abundance of your trade, you were filled with violence, and you sinned. So I cast you as a profane thing from the mountain of God, and the guardian cherub drove you out from among the stones of fire. Your heart was proud because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor. I cast you to the ground. I exposed you before kings to feast their eyes on you. By the multitude of your iniquities, in the unrighteousness of your trade, you profaned your sanctuaries. So I brought out fire from within you. It consumed you, and I turned you to ashes on the earth in the sight of all who saw you. All who knew you among the peoples are appalled at you. You have come to a dreadful end and shall be no more forever.
Okay, thank you, Miss Jean. Oops, teka lang. Minumove ko yung aking, ano, hindi ko mapaliit kasi itong, ano na. Ayan, so here, looking at this text, there were some descriptions about his current state, no, the current state of that man from Sidon. It says here, iniquity was found in you. So meaning he is living probably in sin. The degree we really do not know, but what we know of here is that he is living in sin, and then he was cast out, no, from the mountain of God, and the guardian cherub drove you out from among the stones of fire. Now, hindi ko na underline to, but what is this stones of fire? And then we have here, your heart was proud because your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor. So sounds like this time, sounds like Satan na, no? And it's not referring to Adam now based on the description here. And then I cast you to the ground, I expose you before kings, to the feast, to feast their eyes on you. And then here, so I brought out fire from within you. So now, all the more, para bang it's now, the description is more, it favors more on the reading that it is Satan. No? It consumed you, and I turned you to ashes on the earth in the sight of all who saw you. All who know you among the peoples are appalled at you. You have come to a dreadful and dreadful end, and shall be no more forever. So people will really get mad at him. They will be horrified for what he will experience. No? And this is the text that we will be trying to understand. We will try to interpret. Hopefully, after this, we will get to understand the main point of this prophecy. So first, we need to look at the bigger context. And when we say bigger context, outside Ezekiel, outside the oracles that was mentioned in Ezekiel, what is this? And I mean, how is this uh, being resolved, or how is the different oracles from different books are being presented as well, and what do they address? Okay, so like for this one, this is from Christensen. Oracles against nations are a feature of a number of prophetic books originating probably in context of war and known in the ancient Near East. They have been the literary mode of prophetic judgment speech against both military foes and the nation of Israel. So normally, no, I'm not saying all the time the context is like that, but normally it's in the context of war, and prophecies are used to provide warnings And if you will look at the text, the preceding text, the immediate context of our text this evening, it's talking about, God is going to raise up a nation so that his judgment will fall uh, before these people in Tyre. And basically, if you will look at that immediate context, we see again the present context of war. Pero later on, we will see other other possible contexts, and we'll try to understand how is the context here different from the context of war that is usually present for prophecies and for oracles. No. Okay, so for this one, um, I provided this historical context. I did not use this as part of the activity kasi you need to get more research. You need to, do more research, and at the same time, you need to read more books for the historical context, for the bigger context, and because you cannot just make your own context, no, especially the bigger context, the context outside the text that you are reading. And that's why for this one we will not do an activity, but take note of how I crafted it. So what I did here, I have some backgrounds already of the uh, different contexts when it comes to the different prophetic books. And so I have this material that I read, so I included that. Okay, and then this is also from a commentary as well. No, so this is not mine. I included that in my resources down below later on in my PowerPoint. And then firstly, come short oracle against the small states surrounding Jerusalem, son of Ammon, Moab, Edom, and Philistia. Grouped in one section by B, they are followed by three larger sections of oracles against Tyre, a small section against Sidon, which includes a note of hope for Israel, and finally, oracle against Egypt. So um, I would say that because they are grouped into one, so there's a possibility that they have the same context, they carry the same problems, the same issues. So that's the reason why they are in one section. And yeah, as you can see here, uh there's a problem against Sidon, and then Egypt as well, no. So and asan lang ba yun? Ayun. And take note of this statement here. It says here a small section against Sidon, which includes a note of hope for Israel. So this one is telling us now that one of the major themes would probably be on hope for Israel. No? So that's how these informations would help us at least understand what's happening during that time and what's happening in their bigger context. Okay, so when we talk about hope for Israel, now we still don't know what's the details of that. Why do they need to have this hope? What was happening? Well, from the context that we have right now, what we know is that this is normally in the context of war. The context of Ezekiel is normally in also in the context of war, and then probably because there's war, probably there is sin that is going on. No? May mga problema nangyayari sa nation. Probably a problem with the leader, a political problem doon sa mga subordinate, sa kanyang mga subordinate leaders, and other things. Okay. And then um, in the opening section against small neighboring states, in each case, Lord's destructive action is a response to that nation's attitude to or actions upon the destruction of Jerusalem. In no way, however, does the house of Judah benefit, and there is no hint of Israel recovering land that was once part of the Davidic kingdom. There is also no suggestion that the judgment is because these nations have broken any agreement to support Judah against Babylon. So I think we also need to to put in mind that it's possible that the destruction of Jerusalem, that the judgment of God is under is on Jerusalem or on the people of Israel, not simply because there is some political struggles that are going on, but it's possible that there are other possible reasons other than war, other than political struggles. And like I said, it's possible na because may issue yung king, it's possible na because may issue yung mga tao, yung kanilang mga practices is questionable. No? So those are some possible scenarios that are happening during that time. And then um, And Jeremiah 34 tells of envoys from Edom, Moab, Tyre, and Sidon, but the result is unclear. And in any case, Ezekiel would have opposed any agreement as an act of harlotry in which the lovers turns against Jerusalem as part of Lord's judgment on the city. So there's an assumption here na it's not really because they were having intermarriages or meron silang anong tawag dito, meron silang uh, what do you call that, para bang relation parang wrong relationships with these surrounding countries, because Ezekiel would oppose to any of that kind of agreement, no. So one of the scholars is saying that it's possible na mayroon pang ibang reason why there is that judgment on the city. No? So take note of that. It's not always because there is idolatry or there is wrong, or ano bang tawag natin diyan, yung mga intermarriages, um, yung mga marriages na hindi dapat or mga relationships na hindi dapat. Okay. Ayan. So now, after knowing all of that, I want us to do this activity later on, no? Tapusin ko na lang siguro muna para we will have the time to do the activity. Or I think pwede na siguro natin gawin dahil ilan ba tayo dito? 7 lang naman tayo, no? Randomly lang, you can recite and you can tell me what's in your mind. So now for the next part ng tool na ginagamit natin ngayon, this time we will look at the immediate context. A while ago, we're looking at the bigger context, and normally that is being provided by a lot of different resources, different material scholars. Now we look at the immediate context. We look at the text, the passage, no? So here, write a background based on the described immediate context. One example of that is this one. This is an oracle of reproach in a form of lament. Ayan. So Later, we will talk more about this one. No, na meron din palang mga genres when it comes to the forms of oracles. Na it's not only through a reproach, but it's a reproach in the form of lament. So this is just one background na makikita natin sa context. No, if you will look at your Bibles, you will open your Bibles. There, you will find that it started with you know the message of God came to Ezekiel, and so Ezekiel later on uh, shared this lament oracle. Okay, Ezekiel 28. So, can we do that? Okay, very quickly lang, just write down any observations that talks about the immediate context. What was happening during this time based on the text that we have in Ezekiel 28. Aside from this is an oracle of reproach in a form of lament.
Any observations lang, Pas, no?
Yes, yes. Don't be afraid, no, to make mistakes. Anyway, we are here to be accountable to one another. As long as you're in the context, you will, you will be guided. So try to read the whole Ezekiel 28 so that you will get to understand the context. Okay. Okay, anyone? Meron na ba kayong nakita?
Observation lang pa sa
Okay, go.
Ezekiel 28, 1 to 10. Addressed siya
Mm-mm.
to the Prince of Tyre. Tapos
Okay.
sa 11 to 19, King. The King of Tyre. I don't know if iba ito sa Hebrew or sa version ko lang.
Mm-mm. Okay.
Ako,
Sige, go ahead.
the text suggests that this took place after the exile to Babylon kasi may mention of Daniel.
Okay, nice. Right, right. And most likely, by the way, di ba, did you remember yung basis natin when it comes to their functions? No, where do we get the context of their function? So for example, for Ezekiel, saan natin makukuha yung yung basis ng kanyang function, how he functioned as a prophet, saan natin makukuha? So based here on the text is where can we get sino yung possible na nag-influence sa kanya as a prophet based on the text? It's
Si Daniel, Pas.
yeah. No, it's Daniel. Okay. And here it seems that he knew well the wisdom and the the capabilities of Daniel, and that's the reason why. Are you wiser than Daniel? Is no
Uh,
secret hidden from you. By your wisdom and understanding, you have gained wealth for yourself, and amassed gold and silver in your treasuries. So take note of that. This is very important na yung present ni Daniel dito, why he was mentioned. Later on makikita natin yung purpose niyan. So that's one good context, no? Maganda 'yon. Maganda yung na-note
I
ni
have
Jean.
another observation. Kasi
Sige,
'di
go.
ba Daniel was known for his prophetic dreams.
Mhm.
So si Ezekiel naman, not specifically in this chapter, pero throughout the book, he spoke about visions then. And merong
Mhm.
similar tone to the book of Daniel in that regard. So it really makes sense na he was influenced by Daniel if he was.
Yeah. That's a a possible background based on the context that we're seeing here. So we can say that that's an implied context, no? It may not be, it may not be mentioned explicitly, pero we see it as an implied context. Okay, that's good. That's good. Hindi na natin we will not be discussing all the details, pero at least meron na tayong tatlo. Paki-note na lang 'yon, Obed, if possible, so that later on as we progress, we'll try to use all of those informations in understanding the book, in understanding our text for this evening. Okay lang, Obed?
Yes, bro.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now we move on to the literary criticism, and ito po yung na-discuss natin last time. And so again, what I will do here, I'll be doing this part, no? The looking at the alleged secondary accretions. So later I'll show some informations on these different resources. So because this is a little bit more advanced, and I think for preaching purposes, pwedeng gawin nyo itong tatlo lang. Know as accurately as possible what the prophet said, the context in which they said it, and then identify the principal themes. You can do these three, apply that for your preaching, pero for a more advanced study, an in-depth study of the prophets, you need to also use this fourth one. Okay, so because we've explained this already last time, we will just do an activity again. And for the literary criticism, this is the first tool that we are going to use. Know as accurately as possible what the prophet said. No? So identify the verbatim message from the real message. Okay, this is very easy. Okay, anyone? What's the verbatim message? Now let's focus on 28. Let's focus on 28 verses 11 this time, 11 to 19. So, siguro just tell me the verses that talks about the verbatim. And then we'll try to look at the real message. I did not provide an example kasi baka mabigay ko yung sagot. So,
Just
saan kaya
verse
dito yung
11 lang?
verbatim? Try. Ha?
Just verse 11 lang?
Ano, verse 11 to 19.
Okay.
Mm-mm. Sige.
12 to 19
Go.
pass ang verbatim.
No. I mean, identify which one is the verbatim message and which
Affirmative
one is the
speech.
real message. No, kasi last time when we discussed this, we've talked about possible reconstruction of the prophet. Pero that does not mean na nawala yung message. The message was still there, pero he used human languages. Like for example, pag may nakita kang vision, pag may nakita kang, let's say your vision is, looks like there's a very long path that leads to the heaven. So what does that mean? And definitely you will not write that down verbatimly, but you will have to interpret it and then be able to communicate your interpretation to that vision. Diba? May mga ganong situation. So this time, let's look at saan kaya dito ang mga verbatim.
Pag verbatim kasi, di ba word per word, exactly as
Yes,
it's
yes.
said. So,
Ah,
if that's the case, it's from, kasi kakaiba yung translation ko eh. Pero dito kasi, sa akin, it's from you put the seal on perfection until siguro verse 19 or maybe even verse 23.
19, okay. Yes, this is the like the obvious one, no? Uh, Again, there is no ano naman dito eh. No exact um, uh, walang exact identification of whether this is verbatim or not. Pero um, how about let's assume, no? Let's just assume that this is not verbatim. Yung sinabi mo mismo, Jean. Let's assume that this is not verbatim. Verse 12, verse 12, starting from you were the seal of perfection until 19. Let's assume that this is not verbatim. Now, if we're assuming that this is not verbatim, which one is the verbatim here? The exact.
Ah,
Hmm.
hindi ba 21 to 23? Kasi the word of Adon, sa translation ko, the word of Adonai came to me. And then, ayun, 21 to 23.
21 to 23. Okay, I am against you, Sidon. Tama ba? Yun ang tinutukoy mo?
Yeah?
Okay, I'm against you, Sidon. Among you, I will display. Yeah, possible. Okay. Again, this is for the sake of just analyzing the text. We're not saying na this is not really verbatim. That's not the main point here. The main point here is that we want to know whether this is the exact words or not, so that we would know what's his intention all about. Where is the stress all about, or what was he trying to emphasize? If he will not, if he will make his own rendition or his own version, why would he do that? What could be his possible intention? no, for doing that. And then notice sa akin ang signal ko kasi na it's possible na hindi ito verbatim. Ang signal ko kasi dito, although he said that the word of the Lord came to me. Now when a text says that the word of the Lord came to me, it's not always literal. There are instances that it's literal, but it's not always literal that it's telling us that the Lord said it in this fashion or in this way. No, it could mean that this is God's message. Now I'm delivering it to you, the message that I heard from God, but I will deliver this to you in this fashion so that you will understand it based on your context, based on how you would understand it, because this is what you really need this time. And for this particular text,
Mm.
take note that he is he is trying to convince this king. He is trying to somehow remind this king that ito yung nawala sa iyo. You have fallen. Uh, uh, you have fallen, and this is the things that you have lost. And to communicate that, he had to communicate it in a lament fashion. No,
Mm.
so this is what he is saying. Take up a lament concerning the king of Tyre and say to him, parang madrama nga yung yung pagkaka-portray ni ano dito doon sa message ni God doon sa king of Tyre. Very dramatic. Kasi sabi niya, you were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. Now the question is, did God verbatimly say that? Now, it's possible, I'm not saying 100%, no, but it's possible that he fashioned it this way so that the king will understand his current state and the state that he lost when he came to when he started committing sin. Did you get my point? Nakuha niyo yon?
I think I did. Medyo nagsisink in pa eh.
Yeah. So, but then again, yung sinabi ko, yung disclaimer ko last time, it's really hard to distinguish because we do not know the mind of Ezekiel. We do not know what he saw. So we cannot really 100% say that this is the verses that are not verbatim. But what we can do, we can have a what we call a, uh, a probable assumption, no? Or when it comes to philosophy, we call this inductive uh, inductive evidences or inductive standard of approach for this one because of the context that we're seeing here. No, the yung context of lament that was brought up, we saw that. And then not only the context of lament that the writer is bringing in here, but also how it was fashioned, na para bang si Ezekiel, ito yung yung how he understood the message of God, na para bang you are like this and like that. I have given you all of these things, but you have turned away from me. Now you came from this place, the garden of God, but anong nangyari sa iyo? You were drive out by I drove you out because of your pride and all of that. Okay? So I hope nakuha niyo 'yon. Now let's look at the real message. So assuming that this is not verbatim, although we're not 100% sure, now assuming that it's not verbatim, now what's the real message all about? Now that we concluded that this is not the exact word. So ano ba yung pino-point out talaga ng oracle na ito, ng prophecy na ito? Ano yung main point niya kaya? So what do you think? What's the real message all about?
May I try?
Sige, go, Jean.
Well, based on from what I understand,
Mm-mm.
this is towards Tyre, di ba? Like, regardless of whether prince or king yung kausap, it's about Tyre.
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
Okay. So, from what I understand, Tyre was blessed. Kasi
Okay.
there are comparisons to Eden kasi. And for me kasi, Eden is a representative of God's presence or communing with Him. So it was at that state until sin happened. So
Okay.
ano ba yung sin na yon? Violence, I think dishonesty, kasi nga parang wait lang. Let me check the other translation that I have. Parang may dishonesty ata sa trades nila, tapos merong pride, tapos
Okay.
ayun, may crimes, may profanity. That's all throughout the verses. So yun yung message.
Okay.
For the whole chapter ba? Or just
No,
select?
not necessarily. Not necessarily. Right,
So,
that's good, no?
pa ba?
Mm.
And ayun, God intends to bring judgment towards Tyre and show His holiness in that way. So parang na-emphasize yung goodness and righteousness ni God in that sense. And then sa
Right.
last verse, yung 25, binabasa ko din kasi. Ayun, parang may sense of restoration for the house of Israel based on how he judged the nation of Tyre. And yun yung understanding ko.
Correct. Na pinpoint mo yung yung nabanggit natin kanina. There is a need for Jerusalem to continue to have that hope, no? And having a king like that, that's going to be very problematic for the entire nation. And imagine a corrupt one. And I think another point that we need to again to see here is that, remember the issue, this is the long issue of the people of Israel, even before, no, uh, even during the time of the Davidic kingdom, their problem on having earthly kings. God already said, I'm the one true king. No, kaya so matigas sila. They want a human king that will carry the name of God. And so now we're seeing this another failure, another consequence to that, because they wanted a human king. And I think this is being emphasized again. The yung yung comparison between an earthly king who would fall from the true king, and that is God. And I think that's the message. And God said, no, I will liberate you through judgment, kagaya ng sinabi mo, because I'm your holy God. No, I do not tolerate sin. So I think that's the real message. So we really need to always look at the message beyond the verbatim message. No, we need to look at the message beyond its verbatim message, which is yung nakita nga natin dito. And there was a comment here, it's verses 17 to 18. Yes, no, it's possible. And then just like to take note of verses 17 to 18, here makikita rin natin yung, including 16, makikita natin yung context ng Tyre. Although sabi ko kanina, di ba, normally yung mga prophecies, yung mga oracles, usually it's during the times of wars, no, yung may mga conflict between different nations. But for this particular case, what we know of Tyre is that it's a place of trade, a populous one. It's a city, no? People where this is where people gather for trading, all of that, kasi maganda yung kanyang location. Pero the problem comes in because here is this king who is proud, na again nakalimutan niya yung siguro yung relationship niya with God, and because of that
May
kailangan
add
silang
ako, Pastor.
judge.
Pastor, may
Sige,
add
go
ko.
ahead.
Now that I remember, di ba yung King of Tyre yung nag-provide kina Solomon ng mga materials to build the temple? Particularly yung mga puno nila, yung cedars, I think.
Yeah,
So I guess
yeah.
that sets up the historical context din na that they were rich in that sense, and that they were able to provide quality materials and wood.
Yes. Right.
It's my other observation.
Okay. So, yan, I think na-emphasize na natin, no, yung always look at the verbatim message and the real message.
So,
Yes.
clarify ko lang po. So, parang arguably, no, ang verbatim message natin dito is parang verses 16 to 18, ano, like, in the abundance of your trade, you were filled with violence and you sinned, ganun. Tapos, ang real message natin would be, the king of Tyre used to be blessed and was in God's presence, and now, but became sinful and will be judged by God. Parang ganun yung
yes.
real message. Tama po ba?
And then, yeah. And then the emphasis also of yung sinabi ko nga kanina, na 'di ba ito na yung naging problema lagi ng Israel, na they were very reliant to the human kings, when in fact this one portrays that with human kings the kingdom will fall, but with God, no, the kingdom will endure. And this is another example of that, and that's the reason why God's judgment will befall upon them.
Yeah, parang isa yan sa mga themes din, Pastor, pa napaulit-ulit sa
Yes.
Old Testament.
Old Testament, right. Actually, i-shortcut na natin, no, kasi nabanggit na natin, baka makalimutan pa natin later. Dito pa lang makikita mo na yung mga functions na present dito. He is functioning as a seer, no? Seer meaning he is the direct counsel, or the person that counsels the king at this time. And he functions as the conscience of the king, and at the same time the prophet, the one who rebukes. Okay, so let's proceed. Ayan, now we look at the teka, pinapalit ko lang itong mga box dito. Okay, the context in which they said it, this is also part of the literary criticism. So write the possible reasons why the prophet said it in that fashion. I think I already said it a while ago. What form of communication did he use? No? So he said it in that fashion because he wants the king to realize how he was blessed and now how he has fallen from how he has greatly fallen from a life that is full of blessing and now a life of damnation. Okay, so and then what form of communication did he use? It's through a lament. No, this is ito yung mga sinasabi ko last time na there are oracles that are uh, uh, very definite of its description kasi binanggit talaga, makikita natin dito, sinabi talaga what kind of oracle is this, how is this being communicated, and this is being communicated in a form of a lament. Ayan. So ano pa ba? How about other possible reasons? May nakikita ba kayo? Bakit kaya ganito niya finashon? No? He fashioned it in a form of a lament. Aside from so that the king will, will get, will all the more relate to to the message of the Lord. Aside from yan, ano pa kaya yung dahilan? Possible reasons. Sige. Okay, I think yeah, medyo nasabi na rin naman natin. So maybe we'll reserve that for advanced research. Okay. Now, in the literary criticism, identify the principal themes of the preaching, not the prophet's actual words. So, and kanina, what we did was somehow we wrote a longer sentence, a paragraph. Others would do it in a paragraph form, yung sa real message, no. So here, pwedeng siya para siyang preaching points or pwede siyang parang theme na statement. So I have an example here, like God's judgment upon a proud king. So that's one of the themes, no? And this brings the idea of a fallen king because of his pride, and at the same time brings the idea that God is the one true king. Now, there should be no other king, and people should not be relying on this king, but they should have been relying on God in the first place. So, what other possible principal themes or possible message or oracle or preaching sa context natin ngayon na makikita nyo dito other than God's judgment? Now you can, creatively formulate your own theme based on the context. Pwede kayong mag-send ng message sa group chat. Good evening, Fernand. Welcome. Yun, a human king was never sufficient. Nice one. I like this one. Okay, what else? Ano pa kaya? Meron pa ba? I think here, as long as sin and pride brings a nation to ruin. Yes, that's true. Okay, meron pa ba? Gustong magpahabol? Magaganda, magaganda. Meron na kayong Obed, mga mga preaching points. Yeah, if you want to be more specific, sin and pride brings a king to its ruin or ruin. Nice, nice. Okay. So, para hindi rin tayo masyadong magtagal kasi magto 2 hours na naman ako. I'm very sorry. Sige, let's move. And God is faithful to fulfill His covenant with Israel through restoration. Yes, yes. Okay. Pasensya na, masyado kasi akong mabagal magsalita. So next is reconstruct and differentiate original literary unities from the text from alleged secondary accretions. You know, I have here some resources that you can study. So the interpretative traditions of the rabbis consider the lament over the king of Tyre, and it's this one, no? These are two oracles, uh, and they are considered as one continuous whole, no? So I think natanong ni Obed kanina, the first one is para bang is addressed to a prince, no? Ayan, where's that? Son of man, say to the ruler of Tyre, this is what the sovereign Lord says. In the pride of your heart, you say, I am a God. A God, I sit on the throne of a God in the heart of the seas. That you are mere mortal. Teka, asan na ba yung prince, Obed?
Verses 1 to, basically 2 to 10. Prince yung address. Sa verse 2.
So sa version mo ang sinabi ron, prince. Sabi ba, son of man, say to the ruler of Tyre? Or sabi ron, say to the prince of Tyre?
Prince of Tyre sa NRSV.
Oh, okay, okay. Now, I do not know the reason why it was translated like that. Pero my version, the NIV, is more general, no? He said ruler of Tyre, no? Yeah, ruler of Tyre. More general ito. I think mas maganda yung version mo na prince.
ESV din. Prince of Tyre.
Yes, ESV. Yeah, kasi ano yan mas ano sila, mas word per word when it comes to translation from the Hebrew text. Yeah, I think mas capture yung idea ng Prince of Tyre. Kasi again, going back to how Ezekiel would fashion, the oracle would fashion the message. Here is talking to a ruler, to a prince, doon sa ibang translation. And what do we know of prince? Ano bang alam natin sa characteristic ng isang prince? And I'm sure you all know na medyo compared to a king, mas mas unruly sila kasi they are still gaining, they are still learning, no, from experiences. And so here, ang makikita nga natin dito is that it says here, this is seen as one similar oracle. no? Pero with different way of communication, but the message is still the same, no? Speaks about pride. No, for this one, this is focused on the earthly duties of a ruler, of a king. No, while the other one is not more on the earthly duties, kundi mayroong pagka ano to may pagka Davidic na may pagka Adam na type of a king. Yung sa ano kasi may judgment, may because of what he is doing, there's a bigger consequence to him and to the nations that surrounds them, to the people as well that he is ruling. So try to observe that, no? Ayan. So asa na ba ako dun? Okay. Yeah, did you notice that? Yung kaibahan nila. By the way, hindi pa tayo tapos kung ano to, no? Kung si Adam ba to or si Satan. We'll get to know more of that later on. Pero if you notice, the second one, the address to the king, is similar to the one in Genesis, to what happened to Adam. There is that similarities, and a lot of scholars are debating about it. And most scholars would say that it's David, no, a David kind of a king, a David type. So with the David type, alam natin kung sino ang kanyang ang kanyang counterpart, and that is Jesus. If we will go to the New Testament now, if we will look at the intertextuality of the text, so it's Jesus who is the exact opposite of Adam. Adam failed while Jesus did not. No, but this one is not compared to Adam. It's just a normal king. This guy was compared to Daniel. No. Okay. And that's how you see the connection of the two, but still difference in emphasis. And then to the rabbinic interpreters, the overall story of these two units is one of hubris leading to destruction, and they summarize this overarching narrative by two extracts from its beginning and end, namely, because your heart grew exalted and you said, I am a god, and upon the ground I cast you, and then or sometimes I brought forth fire from your midst, it consumed you. So those are some connections na makikita natin. Okay, so we'll not do more of that because that's really heavy stuff. Now we'll go to the literary devices, the use of figures of speech, and we will try to address some, literary devices here. I got this from a scholar. Says here, the imagery with which the figure is described does not fit an earthly monarch at all. Okay, so example, you were in Eden, the garden of God. Definitely, it's not referring to a human being. So the text appear to be addressing the king as though he were someone else. We are not to imagine that the king was actually in Eden. Rather, the lament is making use of a conceptual metaphor in which the first subject is equated with the second. All the world's a stage, time is money, he's a Lucy, canon, and so on. So yeah, so again, take note of that particular metaphor. No, what could be the possible reason for Ezekiel to do that? What was his intention? And what is he trying to communicate to the people at the time? Because although the people knew know what Ezekiel mean at that time, actually para yan sa atin na hindi nakakaalam. So here, the suggestion is this: the text speaks of Adam, seems irrefutable. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Ezekiel 28:13 we read, can this be other than a translation of Adam into Eden, of which Genesis 2:8 speaks? The Lord God planted a garden in Eden in the east, and there he put the man whom he had formed. No, so that's possible. This is one possible rendition or reading to this text, to the text. And for this one, I read one article who said that there is para bang a person being represented at the time, a ruler. I forgot the name of that ruler who is ruling Ezekiel and the people of Tyre at that time. So it's possible na uh, he represents this kind of Adam na kingship. He represents Adam na kingship because he has fallen. Marami siyang achievements pero yun nahulog siya sa temptation. So it's possible na ganun lang kasimple. Pero it's possible din na it's a timeless truth. Maybe 'di ba sabi ko nga sa inyo may mga prophecies, may mga oracles na meron siyang present relevance, no? Relevant to the people at the time and at the same time with eternal implications. And this is one of those, no? When you're quoting Genesis, when you're mentioning things about Adam, things about God, his judgment and all of that, meron siyang message for the future. And I think that's one of the things that we need to to pay attention to when we're looking at the literary devices. So ito yung sinasabi ko kanina na tool na ginagamit natin ngayon, the literary devices. So for the literary devices, you have to identify whether this is a figure of speech or a literal one. No, but for this one, definitely this is not a literal uh, descriptions regarding the king. Okay. So, teka lang. Okay, the figure of the Ezekiel text is placed with an anointed cherub as guardian, who later drives him out from the garden. Surely this is none other than the cherubim who are stationed at the east of the garden to guard the way back to the tree of life. One might note other features too, such as the onyx stone present in both settings. So if you read a while ago, if you have paid attention to the different stones that were present there, so it seems that it's really referring to the Garden of Eden, and the cherubim there, yun yung nagbabantay, no? Okay. So while these two texts share a number of common elements, they also differ in several important respects. There is no woman or serpent in the Ezekiel text. For example, the event take place on the holy mountain in Ezekiel, yet there is no mention of mountain in Genesis. So this is one issue if we will take that version. And then Ezekiel's lament condemns the figure to complete an image annihilation, whereas Adam is banished from the garden to a life of hard toil. In the minds of many scholars, these dissimilarities were more convincingly explained by assuming that the distinct myth lay behind Ezekiel's lament than by the view that the discrepancies were the result of material having undergone a process of demythologizing as it was being cast into Genesis narrative, that both writers had used the source material freely, or that these features were simply the imaginative invention of the prophet. And di ba last time we talked about this, na it's possible na wala talaga siyang connection sa Genesis, but because the prophet knew about what happened to the book of Genesis, it could be that again, para makarelate, mas maintindihan nung king yung kanyang situation, he had to fashion it in a way that will be more convincing to the king, because he wanted to convince the king that ito yung nangyari sa'yo, you have fallen, you have greatly fallen from this kind of life na blessed ka ng Panginoon to now this kind of life na you will suffer, the people under you will suffer, everything will be taken from you and you will be burned, you know. So that's one possible take, no? Yeah, but we're not saying that that's definite. Did you get that? Yung
As
part na yun?
yung myth po, I think, di ba, parang technical term yun siya sa biblical
Ah,
scholarship. Can you explain more of that? Like, itong sinabi dito na were more convincingly explained by assuming that a distinct myth lay behind Ezekiel's lament.
yeah, it's like a myth, but he's trying to portray it na para bang totoo, or vice versa, uh, it's a myth pero with some, you know, with some truths to what it is, to what he is saying, no? Kagaya nga nung sinabi ko na it's possible na this is an imaginative invention of the prophet so that he will be able to convince the king more, so that the king will, you know, will relate to the message of the oracle, the message of the prophecy to him. So yun yung ano, yun yung ibig sabihin niyan.
Kasi parang, di ba,
This one kasi, this is a ano a term used by the scholar who said this. No, so hindi siya yung, I don't know kung meron katumbas ito na ano, pero I think not. Yes,
kasi parang
Obed?
yung myth natin, di ba, usually sinasabi natin, myth is parang opposite siya sa facts, di ba? Sasabi nyo, uy, that's a fact. I know, that's a myth. Pero parang sa pagbabasa ko ng biblical scholarship ng mga ng mga commentaries, kanyan, mga journals, iba yung paggamit nila sa myth. So, parang ginatry ko pa siya intindihin ano yung
Depende rin sa
definition
scholar.
talaga.
Depende rin sa scholar na nagsasabi nun. May ibang mga scholar na ang myth sa kanila is the myth that we really know. No, so again, depende. Depende talaga yan sa scholar na gumagamit ng terminology.
Kasi yung parang dito sa sa dictionary ko, myth is a traditional story accepted as history which serves to explain
Yes.
the worldview of a people. Parang siya, parang ito yung nagme-make sense sa context na ito, na parang merong traditional story na inaccept ng King of Tyre, pati ni Ezekiel. Parang for them, yun, parang that's a common story na alam nila. And so, parang nung ginamit niya itong itong parang Adamic na parang metaphor, mas nakakonect siya ngayon sa King of Tyre kasi both of them know that story. Kaya parang
Yes.
mas tagos yun sa kanya. Kasi it's a traditional story na both of them know and are familiar with.
And notice that's the common use for the word myth. That's the generic function of that particular word. Hindi siya yung kung paano siya ginamit ng ibang mga scholars. So just like what I said a while ago, it's possible na this was an imaginative, imaginative invention of the prophet na he is saying that you know what, the message of God is somehow similar to to what happened to Adam. Ganito yung nangyari sa kanya. But that did not exactly happen the way he described it. No, we really do not know kung yung na-experience niya ba yung fire, all of that. Hindi naman talaga yun. Kung mapapansin mo, if you will compare it to Genesis, he was just drive out from from the Garden of Eden, and then he started working, nagpakahirap siya sa buhay niya. Pero this one, merong mga naidagdag si Ezekiel to again to highlight yung kanyang point talaga na ito yung sinasabi ng Panginoon sa iyo na your life will be ruined. And so he had to to make this relatable as much as possible so that the king will understand the intention of God. Okay. Okay, so finally we're in form criticism. Medyo bibilisan ko na siguro ng konti, guys. Kasi nga wala na tayong time. Ayoko rin kuhanin yung inyong oras. Okay. So, ito yung napag-usapan natin, no? Pagdating sa form criticism. And now we will be using it to understand the text. So, this is the activity for this one. First, we will look at the genre. Choose from the following genres and justify your answer. Okay, now we have two genres. These are the main genres. Now, I'm not saying that these are the only genres. At times, kagaya nung nakita natin na lament, no? May feature of lament yung yung kung paano kinommunicate ni Ezekiel yung oracle or yung prophecy. Aside from the how oracles are being fashioned at the time or how they are being communicated to the people, ganun din sa genres. No? It's possible na kapag yung text, yung passage natin nag-provide din ng specific genre niya, then immediately we would know kung anong genre. Pero I think it's very clear here, no, doon sa passage natin, you will look at the connections between Ezekiel 11 to 19 at saka yung unang oracle, which is 2 until 5 or until 10. Nandun present yung clear yung announcement of judgment. Okay, we see that. Pwede rin nating sabihin sa version ni Ramcel, reproach. It's the genre is a form of a reproach. He's correcting the king. No, pero ako I would prefer the reproach na genre for this one. Kasi pag tinignan natin yung sa Ezekiel, it's more personal. Yung pag-address dito sa king na ito, it's more personal. And announcement of judgment, pwede rin naman. Kaso ito kasi normally it implies that the whole country are involved in the problem. Although part din yun, kasama pa rin yun, pero yung emphasis kasi dito is about the king, kung ano yung nangyari sa life niya. Okay, ano pa kayang possible genre na makikita natin dito na talagang explicitly minention ng text? Ano pa kaya?
I pass parang chinek ko kasi anong ibig sabihin ng reproach. It means mild rebuke or criticism.
Yeah.
Anong difference niya sa accusation, pas?
Oh yeah, accusation kasi is not, normally it's not true. Yan yung alam natin, 'di ba, sa accusation. Wait lang ha, excuse me, my call. Isaiah. Zai, can you give this to mom? Pastor. Okay. So, but for this one, ang accusation kasi dito, I think is more on yung 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 tingin sa kanya ng mga tao, no, that he's like this and like that. Masama siya, ganito siya. Dito sa text natin, ang parang isa sa mga description dito is that parang may corruption na nangyayari. And then he is proud, all of that. Those are possible accusations, no? 'Di ba ang normal na paggamit ng accusation minsan hindi totoo, yun yung context nun. Pero for this one, it's not. Accusation here is that ano yung pulso ng tao, ano yung iniisip ng tao sa kanya. And accusations, when we talk about the genre, yung mga oracles na accusation ang genre niya, normally totoo yon, pero manifested by people. People are saying that this king is like this and like that. You know, your enemies are saying that you are like this, you're proud, you do evil to others. So yun yung ibig sabihin ng accusation dito. Hindi yung accusation na hindi totoo. Kaya yan ang ginamit ni Westerman. Okay. So for this one, I think it's more of a reproach. Pwedeng announcement of judgment. Pwede rin yan. And then what other? Wala akong masyadong nakikita sa ngayon. Okay. Let's move on. So write down the implied intention or aim of the oracle. Okay. I think we said this already a while ago. Na it's possible that he wants the king to go back to God or to gain senses, no? Ayan. Yeah, to regain his senses and go back to God. Okay. So pwedeng yun yung implied intention or aim of the oracle. I'm very sorry, nagmamadali na tayo. Malapit na kasi. Daanan lang natin yung whole para lang matapos natin. By the way, yun yung emphasis dito sa part na ito. Sa characteristic conceptual, you need to understand what's the aim or the intention of the prophet, or what's the aim of the oracle, yung mismong prophecy, ano yung goal nun. So, di ba nabanggit din natin kanina na na to tell us that there is one true king, and that is not this earthly king but God. And then here, now we look at the linguistic aspect. So for this activity, maganda na makita mo rin yung identify clauses or sentences that prompts issues or illogical sequences. So for this text, focus lang muna tayo sa Ezekiel 28:11 to 19. No, meron bang mga inconsistencies diyan? So you have to look at that. No? You have to check kung meron ba. So for this text, I think wala, napaka-consistent.
Mas yung importance niya na malaman yung parang illogical sequences para makuha natin ano yung parang original text talaga sa form criticism.
For the linguistic side, kasi 'di ba, under form criticism is the linguistic aspect. Dito sa linguistic aspect kasi gustong makita yung logical order ng ng oracle. Kung nagkakatugma ba siya um, or yung first two sentences ay contrary to the other two sentences or are probably parallel or posibleng in contrast din. And when there is contrast, alam natin sa figures of speech na merong ini-emphasize yung yung oracle or may na-emphasize na point doon. And for this one, wala talaga akong makitang ganun na inconsistencies. I tried checking it many times, pero mahirap din na ipilit na meron kung wala naman talaga siya. So more on dito sa linguistics, sa English translation pa lang to, wala pa tayo sa Hebrew. Sa English translation, at ang tinitignan mo dito yung kanyang logical order, yung kanyang sequence ng sentence. Kasi pag sinintax natin ito, wala siyang problema eh. Talagang well properly arranged. Siguro ang pwede na lang ninyong i-take note kapag kaganon, like for this one, bakit mo siya nasabing in order, no? So masabi natin na in order dito kasi makita nyo yung explanation niya from verse 12 to 14. Kung ano siya before, you're beautiful, nasa Garden of Eden ka, kung saan nandito yung mga beautiful stones, and then you were anointed as a guardian cherub. No, he was also anointed. This one, hindi ko to nakita. Sige, mamaya natin babalikan ito. Pero notice the structure of the sentence, napaka-consistent, napaka smooth flowing ng kanyang order. Dinescribe niya kung ano yung king before verses 13 going to 14, pero may slight lang dito, discrepancy. And then I ordained you, you were on the holy mount of God, you walk among the fiery stones, no? And then 15, continuous pa rin. 15, you're blameless. Now he's talking about morality. See the progression from who he is, kung ano siya sa kanyang appearance from now, what kind of character he has at the time, verse 15. And then 16, ayan na, pumasok na yung kasalanan. You were filled with violence, you sinned. So I drove you. Now the consequence of that, because he sinned, I drove you in the disgrace of Mount of God. And then, ano bang nangyari sa kanya? Why is he being expelled? These are the reasons: your heart became proud, and then by your many sins and dishonest trade, you have desecrated your sanctuaries. No, it's possible na winelcome nila yung mga idol practicing, yung mga ritual practices na from other places kasi they are the center of trade. And in verse 19, all the nations who knew you are appalled at you. You have come to a horrible end and will be no more. Okay, so napaka-consistent nun. Pero yung verse 14, this is uh, there's a little discrepancy here. You were anointed as a guardian cherubim. Now sa akin hindi siya para bang may gustong i-highlight yung oracle dito. We really do not know whether he's really an anointed guardian, na ibig sabihin literal na anointed guardian, but it's possible na ini-emphasize lang na meron siyang malaking responsibility before, no, na it's comparable to someone who would guard the Garden of Eden. So it's possible na may ganong emphasis dito. Okay. So yan lang yun yung tinitignan natin when we're talking about the English translation, and when we're looking at the different clauses, sentences, you want to look at how it is being structured, paano siya inorganize, and tinitignan mo yung flow ng thought, kung meron bang parang na-emphasize, pag may parang discrepancy or parang may off. Normally yun yung ini-emphasize doon. Ayan. Okay. Now we are here in the linguistics. We have the Hebrew text offers two possibilities. This one is a little bit more technical. Sa Hebrew kasi, merong mga unpointed text, no? Unpointed text, ito yung mga Hebrew text na walang vowels na nakalagay. Yung mga vowels kasi ang naglagay niyan, mga scholars, to preserve the sound and to preserve the word. Kasi without the vowels there, na linagay ng mga scholars, hindi mo malalaman kung ano yung kaibahan ng mga words, kasi posibleng magkakamukha sila pero they have different meanings. And now the scholars were able to identify each of their meanings. And doon sa unpointed na text, a second addition to the text, the central figure appears to be identified as divine being, a God even. The exegetes, from whom the tradition of vowels and punctuation originated, wanted to avoid this identification and turned the lament instead into the description of glorious cherub expelled from the council of God. So ito yung sinasabi ko, no, yung ibang mga scholars, kahit na ang lumabas talaga is a divine being, no, yung description dito. And then, di ba nga yung sabi ko sa verse 14, nagkataon na nabanggit dito, you were anointed as a guardian of cherub. So all the more, no, na parang heavenly being itong person na dinidescribe dito. However, again, we really are not sure of that kasi this is an ancient text, and without the vowels, it's like that. But if you're gonna put the vowels, it becomes different. And scholars are very good at doing that, no? Identifying these words because they know the language well, Hebrew language. They know very well the context. They know it very well. That's why they know na it's not really referring to a divine being. Pero without the ayun lang, it's something to look at. Without the vowels, the pointed text, they call it, it's referring to a divine being, a God. But if you will look at Targum chapter 4, it's this one. In this source, we find yet another markedly different interpretation of the text. The focus of Targum remains on the real addressee of the lament, the king of Tyre, and metaphorical features, including the cherubim, are removed or transformed so that the whole of the lament speaks directly to a single earthly ruler. So, sa Targum naman, if the unpointed text is referring to a god, the Targum text naman is not referring to a god. That's the reason why in their translation, this part is para bang is translated differently. So in this manner, the lament is transformed into a political warning intended to offer solace and hope to a broken and demoralized audience by assuring them of their eventual triumph over earthly tyrant. And a while ago, di ba na brought up natin ito, I think it was Jean who said this also na parang they are looking for hope, no? And this is in the context of a political struggle. And what we know of here is that the king is a corrupt one, no? And I think if you will ask me when it comes to the best reading, I would take Targum's interpretation. I mean Targum's translation. No, when it comes to ano, kasi maraming issues pag tinik natin siya as 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 a god or a heavenly being. So let's just take it as a figure of speech. Yung he was anointed as a guardian cherub. Ibig sabihin ganun, yung ini-emphasize dito is yung kanyang responsibility, yung kanyang position.
Pas,
Okay, do you have questions on that? Yeah.
Yung Targum po is yung Aramaic no, na version of the Old Testament. Tama po ba? Aramaic translation.
There is Targum, there is Aramaic also. So Targum is a similar pero another para bang tawag dito, another codex, another manuscript. Ano ba bang mas simpler word for that? Kasi halimbawa sa Greek maraming we have papyri, maraming iba't ibang mga copies. Ayon, copies. So Targum is one of these copies. Ancient copies of the biblical text. Pwede mo ring i-check yan sa I think same lang ang lalabas. Ancient Targum sa Google, makikita yan eh. Kasi generic naman yan. Ancient Targum. Yeah, and another translation or copy. Here it's Aramaic translation or interpretation. Okay. So now let's move on to the life setting naman. And here, identify the circumstances or social context that greatly influence the oracle or the whole context. Ano kaya yung social context at the time? No, I think nabanggit na rin ito kanina ni ni Jean na parang it's possible na this is during the time of the Babylonian Empire, even before the time of the Babylonian Empire. And probably they are greatly influenced by the Babylonian Empire. And with that means that they are under the context of ancient Near East, which is to be more specific, yung Akkadian context. And probably they're using the what kind of codex is this? Nakalimutan ko na yung similar to Targum. Nakalimutan ko yung another basta may mga writings na posibleng nag-influence sa context ng oracle. And here, if you will just look at the life and setting features, check ninyo yung inyong mga Biblia. So ano yung mga obvious dito na makikita natin na context? Okay, meron ba dyan?
Parang yung Tyrant King pass, no? Na
Okay.
context.
tyrant king. Um, teka lang.
Considered ba yung sa Eden? Yung references to Eden?
Yeah, it's possible. It's possible. Kasi nga, ancient yun eh. That's more ancient. I think here yung ano, yung trade na life, no? It's possible na 'di ba may ano diyan, may parang corruption, yung binanggit na, or is that again? Yung dishonest trade, tapos you have
Verse 18.
desecrated, verse 18, you have desecrated your sanctuaries. So it's possible na they have adopted foreign, foreign practices. And if we say that's foreign, posible na ano ba yung malapit na lugar dyan sa Tyre? We have Sidon. Most likely, yun na nga, Babylonian Empire is there. So, if that's the case, then isa yun sa mga hinaharap nung ating oracle na problema that he needs to address. Okay, so for this life setting, anything lang na that greatly influence the context and culture of the message of the oracle. Kasi ang goal mo dito sa part na ito sa life setting features, ang goal mo kasi dyan, uh, kung ganito ang context nila because of the influence of the foreign countries, then that means ganito dapat i-communicate ng prophet yung message to the people so that they will be able to relate. And as we have seen here, yun na, pinaliwanag niya na they will be consumed in fire. And in ancient Near East, part talaga yan ng concept of nila, of punishment, na may mga law, Hammurabi, yun pala yun, yung Hammurabi, that's one of the parang mga present na mga laws na naka-influence sa context nila at that time. And that's the reason why yung mga ginagamit na mga figures of speech ng natin dito, ng oracle natin dito, is using the fire will consume you, all of that. Kasi the way of punishment in the context of the Akkadians at the time, where kung hindi ka itatapon sa isang river, you will be thrown into a fiery furnace. In the context of Daniel, he was thrown in a lion's den. So yun yung idea of punishment sa kanila eh. You will be thrown out, kaya mapansin nyo yung emphasis on throwing, being expelled, you are being removed from this place. Ganoon yung idea na makikita natin dito sa text. So,
Can I bring up an observation?
Sige, go.
Nung mention yung fire and being reduced to ashes, it seems like it might be a reference to Sodom and Gomorrah then.
Yes, it's
And how
possible.
it was destroyed.
Yeah.
Kasi diba, I think during that time, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, parang how it was destroyed was well known among them. So they might be drawing comparisons into how
right.
Tyre would be destroyed.
Yeah, that's really a good point. No? Hindi ko rin naalala yan. Yeah, I think so. I would agree with you. No, kasi those are more ancient. Hinahanap ko pa yung ibang possible possible na mga social contexts that are present here. Again, going back to the first part of chapter 28, what we can see here is Daniel, no, because he was brought up here. So most likely yung influence ng kingdom, kung asan si Daniel at that time, extends to their place. Kasi the king would understand, the king of Tyre understands when Ezekiel mentioned Daniel. So that means may great influence. So it's possible na yung context nila at that time was greatly influenced by the context of Daniel, the kingdom of Babylon there at that time. So nakuha nyo kung paano gamitin yung mga tools? Medyo mas malinaw na ba? Anyway,
Yes,
ito
Pastor.
yung... Okay, thank you. Anyway, nandito naman yung clue. I'm very sorry, I'm taking your time na. Ano ba to, Obed? Tapusin ko or what do you think?
Mga ilang slides pa po, Pas.
Naku, mahaba pa ata to. Wait. I-check ko. Ah, teka lang. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 5. Kaya?
Kayo, Pas,
Or
kaya nyo bang i-summarize in mga 30 minutes siguro or less? Kasi pwede naman tayo mag-session ulit.
oo. Iniisip ko kung gusto nyo kasi mas maganda na you will practice it as a group. Anyway, naumpisahan mo at saka ni Jean yung buong discussion and may record din pala ito so pwede nilang panoorin and then you do it together sa ibang mga passages. Kaya gusto ko sana i-run through na ito kasi pag next time na naman baka makalimutan na ninyo para next meeting ninyo depende sa inyo pwede kayong application na agad. What do you think?
Yeah, mas maganda nga
Tapusin
kung
na
ganun.
natin? No? Right?
Tapusin na lang natin, Pas.
Oo.
Actually, minsan umaabot kami ng mga 10, 11 p.m. Anyway, yung mga BTM people, alam naman nila na they can leave anytime. Ganun yung parang
Okay.
principle namin.
Okay. Okay guys, thank you so much. No, alam ko pagod din kayo. Siguro I will not be offended. If you need to go, you are free to go. Pastor William, alam ko busy ka rin. Pero if you need to go, hindi ako ma-offend. Okay? Sige, nasa na ba tayo? Nasa na tayo? Ayan, so I hope nakita natin paano siya gamitin. Basta ang point dito sa life setting features, kailangan mong ma-take note paano na-influence yung mind na oracle kasi doon mo makikita kung bakit niya kinommunicate yung prophecy in that fashion or in that style of communication. Okay, and then last that we need to look at is the essential threat or promise. No, ano yung mga promises ba na meron dito sa text natin? I think this is more of a threat than a promise. No? So, napakaraming threat dito. Like yung siya ay masusunog. Okay. So I made a fire come out from you, and it consumed you, and I reduced you to ashes on the ground in the sight of all who were watching. So mapapahiya siya. No? Pero if you will look at this, yung verse 18, by the way, if you will look at this verse, talagang it depicts the concept of the ancient Near East, no? Na kapag pinaparusahan yung accused or yung may kasalanan, normally he is brought to the public and then there he will be excommunicated, or he will be executed. Now, may mga miracles na nangyayari, like for example, sa Code of Hammurabi, may mga instances na itatapon sila sa river. Yun yung punishment sa mga witch at saka sa mga sorcerer. Pag tinapon sila dun sa river, and then that person survived, then that means wala siyang kasalanan. So yung nag-accuse sa kanya will be burned, will be punished. And this is similar to what happened to Daniel. Remember the story of Daniel? He was tried publicly, and then he was thrown into the lion's den. And then afterwards, God rescued him. And then when he was rescued, ano nangyari doon sa mga nag-accuse sa kanya? They were also burned. No, so again, nakita natin yung context na yon. So that's part of the settings. Pero yon, pagdating sa threat, I think yun lang naman. Mapapahiya siya. He will be consumed by fire, and then all the nation who knew you are appalled at you. So talagang they will all be angry at him. No? Okay, so yon. For this part naman, trying to identify the threats and the promises. Normally kasi ito yung parang reason. Why did the prophet gave that message? Because he is giving a threat or a promise. No, probably to the Jews, this is a promise that God is going to reclaim his king, his throne. Na this earthly king, this corrupt king, I will destroy, but I will reclaim now that throne, and I will be your king. So posibleng ganun din yung message na sinasabi dito. So this can be a threat to the king, but a promise to the people of Israel. It's also a threat to the people of Israel kasi nga they chose an earthly king. No? Or even if they have not chosen to to be led by this earthly king, it's possible na because of circumstances kasi naging makasalanan sila. Now they were under a power. Yeah. Okay. And then description of prophetic ministry. Now we are tapos na tayo sa form criticism, literary criticism, historical criticism. Now we move to the description of the prophetic ministry. And for this part, you have to identify his function and role. No? So meron na akong linagay dito. So here, the activity is this: write down the main function or role of the prophet during this time. So based on my observation, it's he functioned as a seer or king's council, performing a sorry, nagkamali to. This should be covenantal, performing a covenantal ceremony, mediating a ritual offering or prayer, or any that was described in the text. So ano kaya yung function niya dito? I think here, very clear, is functioning as the king's counsel. No? He serves as the conscience of the king, trying to tell him of the things that's happening to him. Okay, definitely it's not mediating in a ritual offering. And by the way, itong King's Council, he is functioning as a King's Council. All the more maka-highlight ito because of how it was presented. The oracle was presented in a lament way, di ba? Na banggit sa verse 11, verse 12. Ayan. And all the more makikita natin na na para siyang konsensya doon, na he's like the person right beside the king saying, alam mo, nalulungkot ako sa iyo, bro, ganito, ganyan. Ang life mo, ito yung mangyayari. Bless na bless ka ng Panginoon, pero ito yung nagawa mo, ito yung mga ginawa. Something like that. Okay, so yun yung gagawin mo basically when you're trying to identify the function or the role of the king. So you can choose from this ones. Minsan yung text, meron siyang description. There's a specific description about his function. Pero for this one, walang specific description. Only implied. Okay. And then finally, here we're in the theological concepts. So for the theological concepts, it's important that we look at the relevance to the people at the time. No, don't immediately jump into into the relevance of today. Hindi ganon. Yung message, may mga messages in the Old Testament that are only intended for the people at the time. Pero meron siyang internal significance at yun yung itatry natin na alamin later on. So here, the activity is write down the main concept relevant to the people at the time. So ano ba yung pinaka-need ng mga tao at that time? Nabanggit na natin kanina na parang una, they need a better king, no? Kasi this king is corrupt. So I think the message for them is that, hey, your true king is not that king. I am your true king. Yun yung sinasabi ni God sa kanila. And then secondly, it's possible na ang maintindihan nila nung mga panahong iyon is that they need to live a holy life, which is one of the major themes of the book of the Old Testament. Sinasabi niya na God is holy, and so therefore you must be holy. You must lead your people in righteousness, not in corruption. No? So isa pa yon na kailangan na theological concept na makikita natin doon. And then what else? Ano pa kayang concept na maiintindihan ng mga tao at that time? So nabanggit na natin yung sa corruption, and then a king who will rule them, and that is God. So yun yung mga theological samples ng mga theological concepts. Now we move on to the relevance for us today. And normally for this one, the relevance for us today, we are going to write down the timeless truth or concept that is also applicable for us today. So what is that? No, sometimes we look at we look at people, we rely too much on people rather than God. So yun yung isa sa mga timeless truth doon. And then I think another timeless truth there na applicable pa rin hanggang ngayon is yung, God is a holy God, and so therefore you should live in righteousness. So you have to take note of that. There are ways to be more specific when it comes to developing your own theological concepts for the past and for today, no? Pero wala na kasi tayong time, pero what we can do is that just write your own exegesis on a particular text, and then pwede kong i-check yun, pwede ko siyang tignan. Pero hindi ko ma-promise talaga na maibalik ko agad kasi may mga papers din akong kinokorek ngayon. Kaya yun, I think makabigay lang ako ng advices kay Obed paano siya gagawin. Okay? So ayan yung mga sources ko. If you want to look at it, I used the Codex Vaticanus for the linguistics. This Codex Vaticanus, it's the Old Testament translated in Greek Septuagint. Now, those are important tools. So if you will look at my entire outline, it's going to look like this. Okay. Ayan. So, para lang makita nyo, magkaroon kayo ng overview. So, ito lahat yung ginamit natin. Historical criticism, literary criticism, form criticism, and then we also have the identify the prophetic ministry that are present there. And then we removed this already. Na-explain ko rin yun kanina. And then immediately we went to the theological criticism. So ganun siya. And then for historical criticism, under that is you need to look at the bigger context and the immediate context. And then next is the literary criticism. Under that is this ones. No? So we divided them. So literary criticism first, know as accurate as possible what the prophet said. And then next, the context in which they said it, under pa rin ng literary criticism. And then identify the principal themes. Ayan. So yan lang yung ilalagay nyo sa inyong mga papers. No? And then you can type here your answers, your observations, just like what we did, Obed and Jean, kung na-remember nyo. Okay, so thank you so much. Finally.